Hi, I'm Shane here with Grayson, and we're having a few conversations talking about our thinking. Very important to recognize the life that we desire, life of peace, purpose, joy, fulfillment, loving relationships, all of those outputs that we want. Really the input, the way we think and perceive the world around us impacts the lives that we live. And especially right now when there's kind of a assault almost on our thinking, whether it's fear-based, worry, anxiety, division, and criticism. It's so important to be grounded and to have an appropriate filter for our thinking. And if you missed the first couple of conversations, you kind of laid some of the groundwork, go back and watch those. If this has been helpful for you, share this with somebody else that you think would be encouraged by this. But today, we're kind of getting into some of the practicals, okay? Like if I recognize that there's some patterns of thinking that I have, there's some filters that are maybe a little bit off. Like, what do I do with that? How do I actually begin to make these changes? Because if nothing changes, nothing changes, right? It's the whole definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting the results to be different when it's the same. So how do I change the way I operate, the way I think, my filters, to appropriately recognize what is good and how to think appropriately and how to think accurately with the influences that we have kind of coming at us 24/7?
Well, I think Paul gives us a really good hint. Maybe more than a hint. Paul's not terribly subtle, but he gives us a hint in the book of Romans, one of my favorites. This is a short little work written by Paul to a church in a place called Rome. And Paul had never met these people, but he loved them and he wanted the best for them. So he wrote a 16-chapter letter, probably broke the bank on postage on the way in there.
Reading,
yeah, exactly. Afternoon. And he sent this to them, and he says, look, guys, I love you. I've never met you. I love you a ton. I have some things I want to say, and I have some things that I think are so important for you to understand about Jesus from someone who ended up being pretty close to Jesus. He says, look, first off, God loves you. Second off, we have taken God's story and we've kind of ran it into the ground. And we've all messed up, but here's the thing. God sent Jesus on a rescue mission for humanity that we call the gospel, to save us from our sin, to save us from broken patterns of living and, yes, thinking, like we're talking about. Jesus came to bridge that gap. He then transfers over to this place where he says, but guys, let me tell you, I'm sad. I'm really sad for my people, the Jewish people, because by and large, they have said no to Jesus. Even though this story is theirs, they've said no to Jesus, and it's because this gospel is so controversial. He says, why would God put such a controversial gospel in place? He says, well, I know why. And it's because God loves Gentiles. And a Gentile is just anyone who's not Jewish. God loves Gentiles like me, like Shane, and he wanted us to be a part of this story too. So he reached out and he invited us in. And Paul says, it doesn't make any sense to me. Doesn't make any sense why God would go that way, but I love it. And what I learn is God's mercy is so unfathomably deep, and his love for people is so great. And he breaks into a song all about it, like he composes one on the spot. It's beautiful. Well, then he comes to the passage I really want to talk about today, which is Romans chapter 12. Paul says, therefore, I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, remember he had just spoken about that, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. And boy, that's what we want. We want to know, what does God want for me? He says, here's how. First off, look at God's mercy. What does that inspire you to do? To submit yourselves, everything about you, as a living sacrifice to God. He says that's your logical act of worship. I read spiritual because that's what a lot of Bibles say. The word is logikane in Greek, which sounds like something I get at the dentist when I'm getting cavity drilled or something, right?
Numb you up before they go
exactly.
to work.
Logikane, it's what we get our word logic from.
Okay.
It says the only logical response to this brilliant, beautiful mercy of God through Jesus Christ is that I give everything I am to God. Well, what does that have to do with our mind, Shane?
Yeah, because right after that he talks about be transformed. Okay, I want to be transformed. I want to be changed. How? By the renewing of your mind. I think when I think about logical, I think about what makes sense.
Yeah.
Like what's practical, what makes sense. And so in light of everything Paul has just unpacked in those first 11 chapters, God's mercy, his unmerited favor, his grace, his love poured so generously into our lives because we've earned it, because we deserve it. No, purely because he loves us and he pours this out through the life of Jesus, through his death, through his resurrection, through his sacrifice laid down for us that we access by faith, by belief.
Yeah.
And so if God's done all that, if he's put me in this spot of incredible identity as his son or as his daughter, what would make sense for me next? It's to give all of me to God. My actions, my motives, and yes, even my thoughts, the way I think. And so we had this option. We talked about this, I think, in part 1, part 2, of okay, I can continue to think in an old way, a way of self-preservation, a way of scarcity, a way that I'm my own provider, I have to get things done. Or I can allow God to renew my mind and be transformed to believe that God's way is best. He wants to lead me to the best life possible. He wants to reveal his will as good, pleasing, and perfect. And so the question for us is to recognize we all have different influences that usually kind of get mixed together to form our frame of thinking, our frame of mind. Maybe it's political influences, maybe it's your upbringing, maybe it's friends and family, or where you work, or where you play. But all of those kind of come together to impact our frame of mind and how we filter truth, lies, encouragement, discouragement. And so the question is there any area of my thinking that the light of Jesus has not penetrated and illuminated? Is this true? Or is this something that I've believed for so long that it feels true, but actually it's not true of who I am. It's not true about who God is, about the people around me, about the world around me. Like, is there anything that I've not been open to? Hey, maybe Jesus has a different perspective to reveal here, and I've just kind of been holding on to this old way of thinking. Because to be renewed in our mind is to be renewed in every way of thinking. There's nothing off limits to Jesus and his leadership in our lives. We're going to get even more practical with this in our next conversation, but for now, I think to begin to ask, what are those influences? And to name them and to say, what are the things I believe about myself, about God, about other people, about my purpose? And does that really align with what Jesus says? So that's the conversation. That's the next step to walk away with. Join us next time as we unpack this even more.